The Daily Read, your source for news, politics, sports, and all things trending. Here's your host, Marcus Gentry.
A new government report estimates a record number of Americans are experiencing homelessness.
Can you be held criminally liable for a scenario that you can't avoid, i.e. living in an area where there aren't any other options other than living on the streets?
Supreme Court is going to weigh in on whether local officials can legally ban people from camping in public spaces.
The petition filed Tuesday asks SCOTUS to reverse a 2018 Ninth Circuit Court ruling, which specifically prohibits states and cities from outlawing urban and homeless encampments unless the community has enough shelter beds to house those who need it.
Real estate. Do you want to be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams? Well, I've got one word for you. Real estate. No, we're not talking about buying your first house. What are you, 5? This is the big leagues, kid. We're talking real estate investing. Cash flows, capital appreciation, indigestion, real estate. Oh God, I'm a child. All kidding aside, today we actually are talking about real estate, but specifically real estate investment trusts, or REITs. These are companies that individuals can invest in, just like a stock, to gain exposure to real properties. And while I'm not going to stand here and tell you that real estate is the way to become a millionaire for the average Joe,
the business motherfucker.
I want to welcome you to the Daily Read, and I am your host, Marcus Gentry. Today we're going to talk about the homeless. I travel all over the place, all over the United States. I deliver loads here and there, and I see tent cities popping up everywhere. I also just got involved in stocks. I didn't have enough money. I've been knowing about stocks for a while, and I didn't have the funds to invest in them. But I just now started investing in stocks. And I noticed that a lot of REITs, ETF stocks, were paying out higher and higher dividends off of your money. This is what we're going to get into today. Is this the cause of America's homeless? Now, I'm not saying everybody's homeless because of high prices and rent, but it is something to consider. Some people are just homeless because of mental health issues or drugs. But is that the case for everybody? I'm going to jump into that.
The Daily Read, your source for news, politics, sports, and all things trending. Here's your host, Marcus Gentry.
A new government report estimates a record number of Americans are experiencing homelessness.
Can you be held criminally liable for a scenario that you can't avoid, i.e. living in an area where there aren't any other options other than living on the streets?
Supreme Court is going to weigh in on whether local officials can legally ban people from camping in public spaces.
The petition filed Tuesday asks SCOTUS to reverse a 2018 Ninth Circuit Court ruling, which specifically prohibits states and cities from outlawing urban and homeless encampments unless the community has enough shelter beds to house those who need it.
Last month, the Supreme Court announced that it'll be hearing a case in April that will have serious lasting impacts on the way that cities across the country manage the current homelessness crisis. The announcement about Grants Pass v. Johnson flew largely under the radar, but its implications are widespread and could have devastating consequences.
Now, I want to stop that just to say that keep this in mind, people. The average male makes $55,000. That's the average male. The average black male makes about $50,000 to $45,000. The average black male. Keep that in mind when we're watching this video. That's very important.
For people experiencing homelessness from LA to New York City and everywhere in between. But Grants Pass is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the ways in which we regulate homelessness in this country. Instead of passing laws that provide support to people clearly in a housing crisis, municipalities, states, and federal agencies pass regulations that largely criminalize an entire population for not being able to find housing. This criminalization then pushes them further into the periphery of society. But it's a crisis that's become impossible to ignore, not only in large coastal cities, cities, but also here in the Midwest and even in rural parts of the country as well. As cities begin to buckle under the weight of the homelessness crisis, they're turning to ever more draconian measures, not to try to help the people who need it most, but instead to more effectively brush them under the rug so they're easier to ignore. If Trump wins in November, he's suggested sending the homeless to internment camps on land no one wants. Sound familiar? From hostile architecture to outlawing camping, this is how the United States criminalizes homelessness.
Stop that right there. But I want you guys to get the understanding that everybody needs to watch this video. Serious matter. Because like I said, I've been knowing about it. I didn't know about REITs, but I've been knowing about stocks for a long time. Now the REITs pay dividends. Dividends go back to the shareholder every month. So when you get your rent taken, your $1,800 a month rent, which used to be $1,200 5-10 years ago, which used to be $800 20 years ago, your rent goes to the rental agency. The rental agency pays the stock 90% of the earnings off of this rent. So your next door neighbor could be making $60,000. You and your wife could be making $80,000, and you're wondering, he's paying his rent. He's not struggling at all. But you living paycheck to paycheck. He's getting dividends every month. He's paying $1,800, you paying $1,800, but in reality, he might be paying $1,200 a month. Depends on how much dividends he's getting back. The real thing.
Unhouse people to designated areas or forcibly send them to substance use or psychiatric treatment programs against their will. This has profound implications for a community of people who are already vulnerable and whose ranks have been growing steadily in recent years. A report issued at the end of 2023 indicated that there had been a 12% increase in homelessness since 2022. A reported 653,000 people were homeless, the highest number since the country began recording in 2007. Prior to
I think it's more than that.
COVID, homelessness had been on a gradual decline across the country. In 2021 and 2022, homelessness levels generally flattened as people benefited from COVID relief measures like moratoriums on evictions and pauses on student loan debt. But in 2023, those moratoriums lifted, the pauses stopped, and the devastation that had been staved off by government programs accelerated at jarring speeds. The combination of lost income, backlogs of owed rent, and a lack of government foresight led to a surge of people ending up on the streets. And much of the increase was in people becoming homeless for the very first time in their lives. And we'll get into the housing shortage, but increase in housing costs combined with severe inflation means that literally half of all renters, 22.4 million households, can't technically afford their rent under the accepted standard that paying more than 30% of your income on rent renders that rent technically unaffordable. Add to that the fact that fully 63% of working adults say they wouldn't be able to cover a $500 emergency. And you have an unprecedented portion of the population that, if they aren't already homeless, are one emergency or missed paycheck away from being there. And the numbers only tell a very small portion of the reality of the housing crisis. Not only is it extremely difficult to pinpoint the exact number of people out on the streets every night due to the transient nature of their existence, the number of people sleeping in the streets or in shelters is only a small portion of the people in the United States who don't have a home to go to. People who are living in motels or are couch surfing in the homes of friends and family aren't considered homeless. And often people will stay on the street until they can save up enough to spend a night in a motel, and then they're back on the streets again. Often parents will live in shelters and on the streets while their unhoused children stay with friends and family. The nature of the homelessness problem is incredibly complex.
Now, I want to stop that again. Important, because they was talking about shelters. When you got, this is another reason why they're so big on deporting illegal immigrants. The illegals that are coming here, filling up our shelters. So now you have American citizens who are homeless because of rising rent. Rising your rent is because the REITs are paying out dividends to the stockholders. That's why your rent goes up, goes up, goes up. You might start off paying $1,200, now you paying $1,650. the rent constantly going up. So now you don't have a place to stay. So you go down to your local shelter, and it's full of immigrants. So they got to, instead of doing something about the REITs, they're going to do something about the immigrants. The pattern. I see patterns in everything. And it's a strange pattern. Because instead of you fixing the actual problem, you want to take it out on immigrants. People coming here trying to find a better way in life. Got all these homeless people, no shelters to go to. Shelters are full. These people are protecting their money. And the sad thing about it is, we don't get taught this as minorities. We know it takes money to make money. We always hear the older people say stuff like that. It takes money to make money. But they're not saying why. You invest $1,000, you can get $10 back every month. So think about it. Scale it up. You and your girlfriend or you and your wife, you invest $1,000 a month, $1,000 every 2 months. Just take the money out. Don't spend it. Sooner or later, after 15, 20 years of doing that, say if you started at age 18, your pops pull you up, say, hey man, you know about the stocks? Oh, okay, well let me tell you about it. So he gets you an investment stock portfolio. You invest in REITs. Every month, that kid who's 18 years old, for 10 years, puts money into that, put money into that. By the time he's 30, he can live across the hall from you. You don't even know it. You might even think he's doing something illegal. And 9 times out of 10, minorities, we're not taught this. We're not taught this. This is something we run across in a conversation, or we run across on YouTube, or we run across, and it's crazy. Let's continue on.
And each person experiencing homelessness is trying to survive using whatever means necessary, making them hard to trace. And the cycle is incredibly difficult to break. Someone sleeping on the street, in their friend's living room, in a hotel they can't afford, they have to constantly be thinking about where they'll get their next meal and how they'll get a hold of some money to find a place to stay the next night. They also are often vulnerable to attack and assault, both when living on the street, but also if they're in abusive situations that they can't leave for fear of ending up on the street. Sleeping in a car or on a couch provides little comfort, making it hard to function day to day. The cost of the rental unit alone needed to store their belongings after losing their home can become insurmountable. When you live on the street, where do you store your clothes so you can look clean and presentable if you do have a job? How can you show up to work and be effective if you don't know where you're going to sleep that night? How can you get a job to begin with if you haven't had access to a shower in a month? Children living in these situations often struggle with school and interpersonal relationships because of the lack of housing stability. The draw of semi-permanent encampments for unhoused people is the relative stability that those encampments provide. A place to return to every night that provides shelter, a community of people who don't shame you for not having housing, and often access to resources from community groups who are able to set up facilities within the encampments. Encampments can also be unsafe, and sleeping in a tent doesn't provide the security that sleeping behind a locked door can provide, but they offer a sense of stability that other options, including temporary shelters, can't. The reality, of course, is that a tent isn't a home, and encampments aren't or shouldn't be a permanent solution to the crisis we're currently facing. But the reason that encampments have been popping up in cities across the country is because they're often the best option among a slew of bad options. And when cities spend time and resources to demolish these encampments instead of addressing the underlying problems, they're not just making it go away. The tents will continue to pop up in other places until we actually do something about this already. And when you look at this cycle of homelessness, where it can be incredibly difficult to come back from becoming homeless because the hardships often snowball beyond one person's control, you can imagine the additional strain that criminalization would add to an already horrible situation. Not only do you have the cost of a rental unit to hold your...
Stop there, bro. What she's talking about, criminalization. Again, the rise in dividends from the stocks, REITs, your ETFs, paying out to wealthy people for housing, kicks people out because they can't afford the rent. These people are being criminalized. So when they're being criminalized, it causes another problem because now they got to pay court costs. They already don't have a place to stay. Now they got to pay court costs. Now they got to pay all kinds of go to jail, get out, still homeless. Can't just make this go away. Some cities I've driven through, since I'm a truck driver, you have to go around the city depending on what kind of load you have. And a lot of these tent cities are located on the outskirts of some of these major cities. And you can see them off the highway. You can see little tents put up off the side. And they're criminalizing these people. Like I said, instead of fixing the problem, I'm not saying you can pay out dividends. That's a way of making money. Free country. But at least get it to a point where it's a set rate instead of constantly going up, going up, going up. Because they have some REITs out there for the last 20 years have paid out higher and higher dividends to some of the America's wealthiest people. These people are not in need of housing at all. Get back into it.
Personal items until you can get back on your feet, but now you have a fine to pay because you broke the city ordinance against sleeping outside. You can't pay that fine, so it becomes a criminal penalty. Now you have a criminal record, making it even more difficult to find a job or rent an apartment because of mandatory background checks. Criminalization is the exacerbation of an already horrible problem, and that is why attorneys for the plaintiffs in Grants Pass v. Johnson are arguing that these ordinances amount to cruel and unusual punishment. It's the ultimate salt in the wound, kicking people when they're already down. The way that we treat people experiencing homelessness is inhumane, and I think one day we will look back on their treatment aghast at how society could ever be so cruel and draconian. Unfortunately, we're not at that day yet, and in fact, we have made very little progress in the centuries since industrialization pushed people into cities and created modern-day homelessness as we know it. Criminalization of homelessness has existed at the state level for centuries. Victorian-era vagrancy laws were written so broadly that they were applied to generally any behavior that a cop in that moment might deem suspicious or offensive. They included having no visible lawful means of support, begging, consorting, and occupying public places at night without a lawful excuse. This also included the criminalization of sex work and of cross-dressing, or generally seeming a little too gay for comfort. Debtors' prisons were a common way to herd poor people into cells until their debts were repaid. Victorian-era vagrancy laws gave way to Jim Crow laws at the turn of the 20th century.
I'm going to stop there right there. The vagrancy laws is what they're trying to put in place now. Because, again, it goes back to stocks. It goes back to the stock market. That's why a lot of people are concerned about the stocks. That's why a lot of people ignore the bigotry coming out of Donald Trump's mouth and some of his supporters, because it's about the stocks. The reason why Joe Biden is doing so well right now is because the stock market hasn't crashed. He's maintaining it.
Criminalizing black people for generally existing in a way that a white person at any given moment may decide they didn't like. And indeed, to this day, the criminalization of homelessness is aimed at BIPOC and LGBTQ communities at rates that far surpass the white heteronormative homeless community. However, with the onset of the Great Depression and the commencement of World War II, as part of the New Deal, the government financed the aggressive construction of homes to combat a lack of housing, and the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency was later founded during the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson to build and rehabilitate millions of housing units. Of course, due to racist zoning laws, restrictive covenants, and federally mandated racist apportionment of government housing resources during and after the New Deal, many of the most vulnerable people still didn't receive much of these benefits. But that at the very least, the federal government took some role and responsibility in addressing housing and the housing shortages in this country. And then one man came along, and he saw what HUD was doing, and he saw the prosperity of post-World War II years, and he said,
You see that? See that? Put up a stock market chart. Go back to that. Yes, put up a stock market chart. There it is. Right again. But let's continue. That's one of them. That's one of the charts, right? I think that's the supply and demand chart, part of the stock market. Basically, it's about that money. You don't have a homeless problem because these people are vagrants, and the homeless problem is going to keep increasing. And then you have the vagrancy laws turning these people into criminals. And guess who's benefiting off of that? They got private prisons everywhere. Stock market. Private prisons have private stock.
It. There is little, if any, incentive in the private market to provide low-income housing. There is more money in housing the rich than in housing the poor. And this is basic economics 101. In a perfect free market, as demand goes up, the supply should also naturally go up as well. But demand is not the same thing as need. There is a huge need for affordable housing. But for the free market to work, there must be demand, which is backed up by cash. Poor people don't have cash, so the market doesn't give a fuck about their needs. Their needs don't register in supply and demand because the market doesn't respond to anything that isn't backed up by cash. It's the literal reason why we need a government that protects the needs of the people that the free market leaves behind. And because of this ill-informed policy to privatize affordable housing, the federal government went from decades of direct intervention into the housing market to provide adequate supplies for Americans to washing its hands of managing housing altogether. And it's held that stance ever since, leaving the development of housing in the hands of private enterprise and pretending that there's
Leaving it in the hands of private enterprise. And you know what the private enterprises are going to do? Let's get to it. Show you what they Let's discuss REIT.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Go to skl.sh/theplainbagel8 to get a free 2-month premium trial. REITs were created in the US in 1960 as a way to allow everyday investors to gain exposure to real estate without taking on excessive risk or requiring large sums of money. Since then, the security structure has been introduced to a number of countries around the world, including here in Canada. And these days, it's a very popular instrument, held alongside stocks in many portfolios. But for beginners, it's probably not clear what a REIT is or how it differs from a corporation. After all, units or shares of a REIT can be traded publicly on stock exchanges, like the New York Stock Exchange in the US or the Toronto Stock Exchange in Canada. And while in Canada, units of a REIT are given a .un suffix, there isn't much else that differentiates them from standard stocks. But REITs are primarily an income instrument. While stocks have the option of paying a dividend, REITs are required to pass along most of their profits to investors, which we'll touch on later. Some REITs earn and pass on revenue from mortgages they lend to home buyers, but the standard equity REIT, which we'll focus on today's video, typically earns its revenue the way you would expect, from the rent tenants pay on properties they own. Now, the types of properties held by a REIT...
Now remember what I said earlier. That I've invested myself because I really wanted to see how this is panning out. Plus, I wanted to get some money. I invested $1,000 in REITs, nothing but REITs, an ETF REIT. I get $10 a month, depending on off of $1,000. Now, the $1,000 is still mine, but I invested it, and I get $10 a month off of REITs. That means when you pay your rent, your $1,800 rent, it goes to a big conglomerate company because the government is getting out of housing and they turned it over to private investors. So they made these big companies that are taking your rent money and have to pay out 90% of that to the investors, like me. It could be somebody across the hall from you. $1,000 get you $10. Let's add that up. You and your girlfriend, you and your wife. Every 2 months, you put $1,000, $500 from her, $500 from you, into REITs. Now you got $20 a month. It adds up. You do that for 20 years. Listen what I'm saying, people. This is what's going on in America. they have pressure from the investors on these people to raise the rent because the investors want more money, which is going back to the homeless problem. Continue on.
Can greatly alter the risk-return features of the company. So it's worth going over the different types of REITs that you can run into. Residential REITs, for example, own and operate homes, apartment buildings, and condos, which they often rent out to individuals and families under one-year terms. Given the essential nature of housing, these REITs are often viewed as being on the safer end of the REIT risk spectrum, although they are far from immune to financial strain and can still suffer if there's an economic downturn. At the other end of the spectrum are retail REITs, which own malls and other retail buildings and shopping centers. Retail REITs rent out their space to retailers. And while residential REITs typically charge a fixed rent, retail REITs actually have a variable component to.
Now just think about the Walmart that you go to every day that you've been seeing for the last 20 years. In the same place, Walmart doesn't own that building. It's been there for 20 years. Somebody else owns that building. He also or she also owns a building 20 miles from you. Several buildings. And maybe renting a building out to Kroger's. That money that they get off of that permanency of that Walmart or that Kroger's goes into the dividends and gets paid out to people who invest in that company.
The rent they charge that's based on store sales, meaning that the REITs share some operational risk with their tenants, earning more money when retailers see higher sales and less when business is slower than usual. There are also office REITs, which, as the name suggests, own buildings that provide office space for either a single tenant or multiple tenants. And industrial REITs are a broader category that include everything from warehousing space to factory sites. Other REITs still hold multi-purpose buildings. And you can even find REIT companies with more unconventional properties, including hospitals, data centers, bridges, self-storage sites, and even cell phone towers. Clearly, the sector encompasses a wide range of businesses with their own unique features and quirks, but the fundamental business model of each is the same. Allow a tenant to use your property and earn a recurring rent. Now, compared to investing in properties yourself, REITs have a number of advantages. Firstly, REITs are professionally managed and require no operating expertise or effort from the investor, compared to a landlord that may be receiving calls at.
Now, what he's saying there is you can own property because you own stocks in that company. But you don't have to be bothered with calling a plumber at 2 o'clock in the morning because a pipeline has bust. You just collect your money at the end of the month.
2 in the morning to fix a burst pipe. That itself is obviously a pretty big perk. REITs also provide you exposure to a diversified pool of real estate assets that can span different countries and sectors, whereas most real estate investors often have a lot of money concentrated in individual domestic properties, and they're usually limited in the type of properties that they can hold. Finally, REITs are very liquid. You can invest virtually any amount you have into a REIT and sell the holding on any given trading day, whereas it can take months to settle an actual real estate transaction. Now, obviously there are some advantages to buying properties yourself. Real estate investors can control the costs of their operations by putting in work themselves, and the leverage offered by mortgages can greatly expand their return potential, especially with low interest rates. But REITs are generally viewed as being the safer and more beginner-friendly option of the two. So that's the gist of what a REIT is and why investors like to use them. But why the special label? After all, you don't need to be classified as a REIT to be a real estate company. So what gives? Well, the answer to that question lies in the last word of the label: trust. A trust is a legal entity whereby a trustee holds and manages someone else's assets on their behalf, following strict rules laid out by the trustor, the person who gave them the assets. While in the US, REITs are classified as corporations, in Canada, they are actually designated as unit trusts. And in both countries, this means adhering to a number of strict requirements. For example, the majority of assets held by the REIT must be real property. Makes sense. In the US, at least 75% of the company's assets must be invested in real estate. And in Canada, REITs cannot hold any property that isn't deemed a qualified REIT property. Companies must also derive at least 75% of their gross income from either rents from real property, interest on mortgages financing real property, or the sale of real estate properties themselves.
Now, he has that number low. The number he's saying here is 75% of their income has to be from rental property. But they have to pay out 90%, almost 90% of their take home to dividend investors. So if they get $2 million a year, 90% of that has to go to the investors. The rest of that they put in the bank to pay employees like plumbers, roofers, people to come out and cut your grass, people come out, make your toilet, and then they pay their employees, of course. It's a vicious cycle.
But one of the most notable requirements for REITs is that they must pay out the majority of their profits to investors in the form of dividends in the US and distributions in Canada. In other words, REITs don't typically retain their earnings, but instead pass them through to their investors. This sort of goes on with the idea that the real properties held in the trust belong to the investors themselves. In the same way owning an apartment building would generate you income from the rents paid by the tenants, REITs take the money they earn and split it across their investors based on their percentage ownership of the company. But while this may sound like a standard dividend that you might get from another stock, it has a very important implication when it comes to your taxes. You see, when a normal company earns income, it pays corporate taxes on the amount earned to the government and can then choose to pay a dividend to their investors using their after-tax profits. When investors receive the money, it is taxed a second time at the investor level, but at a preferential dividend rate. When it comes to REITs, however, dividends and distributions are passed along to investors before they're taxed at the corporate level. This effectively eliminates any corporate tax a company would have to pay if they choose to pass along all of their income for the year. But rather than canceling the tax liability itself, it simply passes it on to the investor. In the US, REIT dividends are unqualified, meaning they are taxed at an individual's marginal income tax rate rather than the preferential dividend rate seen by standard stock dividends. In Canada, the taxation is more complicated because the trusts pay distributions rather than dividends. This just means that the amount paid to the investor can contain a number of different sources of money, including income, return of capital, and other payments, each of which come with different taxation implications. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can learn more about that. But the point is that the taxation of REIT distributions and dividends is different than that of money from a standard corporation. Obviously, this is something you'll need to be aware of when filing your taxes. And while
Very important. But it's not enough to just have $1,000. When you have $10,000, $20,000 and you're getting paid $300-400 a month, then you got to worry about it. I mean, you're still supposed to worry about it, but it's not going to come into you're not going to be violated with $500 to $1,000 invested in stuff. Stay on top of it, but don't worry about it too much until you start making $300, $400, $500 a month, because that money you're getting off your REIT is offsetting your rent. So everybody around you rent is $1,800 a month. Yours is too. But you getting $500 a month from the REITs that you've invested in. So your rent is actually $1,200 a month.
income from REITs isn't inherently taxed more heavily than standard dividends when you consider the corporate and investor taxes, it's something to consider when comparing the higher yield of a REIT to that of another company. While a REIT online may look to offer an 8% yield when you do a quick Google search, its after-tax yield may be less than that of a stock showing a yield of 7.5%. All that being said, REITs are still a popular income instrument, especially if held in a tax-exempt or tax-deferred account, like the 401k in the US or the TFSA in Canada. On top of this, even though REITs are sought out for their dividends, their unit price can appreciate just like other stocks. You see, even with a REIT paying out 100% of its income, it may still see its unit or share price increase as properties appreciate in value, and the company itself improves or expands operations with debt or equity financing. Again, this makes the return earned on a REIT similar to that of owning a property yourself, albeit with less leverage and certainly less hassle. So that's the basic overview of the REIT. With all the millionaires that we see out there building their massive real estate empires by their mid-20s, there are probably a few investors watching this that are enthusiastic about hopping into the industry. But as with any investment, it's important to look into whether the security is an appropriate holding for you, given your unique financial situation. Investing in REITs also provides no return guarantee. It requires just as much diligence as investing in stocks. So in the same way you wouldn't buy a house without checking out the foundation, you probably should know a thing or two about the REITs you buy. You can gauge the profitability of a REIT by calculating measures like funds from operations, adjusted FFO, and net operating income, industry-specific measures of profitability.
Yada, 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 yada. Going on about technicals. Let's get the Michael Popop. And this is why I say this, people. This last part of the videos, doing 3 videos. The last part of the videos that I'm doing today is because as a minority in the country, we're not taught this. You know it takes money to make money. We're not taught this. Not like the white classmate in high school whose father is an investor and owns a barbershop or a pawn shop. By the time that kid leaves high school, turns 30. Now, it is some black people out here that know about this. There's some minorities out here that know about this. They're not telling you this. They don't care. As long as they're getting a slice of the pie. I don't care. I don't give a fuck. Put this information out there. I love it. It's smart. It's smart money. But let's get to Michael Popop because he says something about Donald Trump's acquisition or merger with another company for Truth Social. And this is what I mean when I say a lot of Caucasians know about this and a lot of minorities don't know about this. I'm not saying he's a racist. Not saying that. Understand what I'm saying. There's a lot of institutional racism in this country. Institutional racism doesn't mean that this man is a racist. Institutional racist is where there's certain things that's done in this country that excludes us, that only a few of us in the minority know about. So what happens is, I heard what he said on the radio. I understood it. A lot of black people can listen to what he's saying and it goes right over their head because they don't know nothing about they don't know about REITs, they don't know about ETFs, they don't know about day trading, stock market, they don't know about none of this stuff. What this man is probably a day trader. He probably gets his money, get up early in the morning, turn on the stocks. He does news, but he's probably also a day trader. He turned on the news and saw Donald Trump, his Truth Social, is merging with another company. That merger is going to make Donald Trump millions and millions of dollars. But he's also saying that get in if you're a day trader, buying up some of these stocks because the volatility is going to be very high once it goes public. I understood what he was saying. He was talking to a certain set of people about the stocks. It went over a lot of people's heads because they don't know nothing about this stuff. This is amazing. Listen to this.
Donald Trump's initials, DJT. The underlying fundamentals are not being examined by the investors because they don't care. at all. If they examined the fundamentals, they would understand this is a meme or cult stock that has no economic purpose other than to line Donald Trump's pockets. There's no other way to put it. Revenue in 2023 for the entire company, revenue was less than $4 million, which is not a lot of revenue for a social media company. I'll put it at that. It's
let me stop this right here. He doesn't like Donald Trump, and I don't neither. It sounds like for people who don't have an ear for this stuff, it sounds like he's talking bad about Donald Trump's stock. But if you know about day trading, what he's telling you is don't buy the stock. But if you want to day trade it to make money off of it, when it goes public, it's going to be a lot of volatility because there are millions of people who like Trump in this country. So they're going to buy up his stocks and they're going to sell it. So Monday morning, you're going to see, he said it, Donald J. Trump, DJT, that's the stock ticker. So the stock ticker, that's the digits of what the stock is. The stock ticker, DJT, Donald J. Trump, it goes public. Goes public means they're going to be offering stocks to millions of people. I understood what he was saying because I'm involved in this stuff now. He's telling the world, if you're a day trader, this is a good time to make money off of Donald J. Trump stocks. Don't buy it and keep it and hold on to it. Day trade off of it. Get money off of it. Scalp. Listen to this.
It's a profit negative $49 million. So this is a company that had $50 million of loss on $3 or $4 million of revenue. And people have bid that stock price up to over $40 a share. Unit price for an investment in a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC, which is how this Trump Truth social media company started, was $10 a unit. So people have bid up the price by 400% based on zero economic reality.
Now, listen to what he's saying. I'm trying to explain something to you people. It sounds like the untrained ears talking bad about Donald Trump, and he is. But what he's saying is Donald Trump stock is at $40 a share. But the actual stock is not worth $40, it's worth $20. So whenever he goes public and people start trading Donald Trump stocks, you can make money off of this because you're going to have a lot of volatility in his stock. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have people trading it for $40. People are going to be selling it for $30, selling it for $20 because the stock market has a lot of volatility. There's a lot of people that hate Trump. There's a lot of people that love Trump. And this is what I mean by institutional racism. He's not coming straight out and saying, hey, this is a good time to get money off of this stock. Get in it, buy a couple of shares, wait till the stock goes down, sell it, goes up, sell it, because it's going to fall because Donald Trump is not worth $40 a month, $40 a share. It's worth $20 a share. Buy it up, sell it. It's gonna buy it up at 20. Once it gets to 40, sell it because eventually it's gonna go back down to $20, $25, $22. So buy it at 20. He's telling you, buy it at 20, but go back when it gets up to $40, sell it, make your money off of it, and watch how the stock falls back down to $15, $20. See, this is what I mean when I say institutional racism, because he could have just flat out told people who's into day trading, get your money, man. But it seems like people don't want to get the word out to people that don't know about this stuff. Listen closely to what he's saying.
Because they don't care. They don't care. They're just trying to they know they're putting money in the pocket of Donald Trump, and they're doing it. I mean, just to show you the size comparison, Truth Social has 9 million users. I mean, that sounds like a lot, except when you understand that Facebook, a competitor of theirs, has 3 billion users. They're up against Meta, Facebook, Twitter, X, and all of that. Even Reddit, which is going public at a ridiculously high number, at least has business fundamentals behind it and profit and a size, just the sheer gargantuan size of Reddit. I mean, this is very familiar, except tie it to the cult of Donald Trump, to the meme stock run in 2021 that bid up for no reason whatsoever the stock price of GameStop and Bed Bath & Beyond. Remember that company? Where is it today? There's a whole book and movie about this run.
Yeah, I think he's a day trader.
And it's called Dumb Money. And the dumb money, which are retail investors at that time on Reddit, who just decided to save GameStop from short selling institutional investors because, you know, they like taking out video games from malls. So they decided to rally around it and save it. And they bid the price up, and there became these paper millionaires and 100 millionaires before the stock ultimately crashed, because GameStop is not fundamentally a proper business model. Good.
Listen to what he said. When you buy a stock at $20 and it rises to $40 and then you dump it, you sell it, you made a $20 profit. So if you are an investor, if you're an investor, even if you don't like Donald Trump, he's letting it be known that the shares aren't worth nothing but $20. And Donald Trump is going public Monday with his new Truth Social social media platform. He's telling you that the platform is not worth the money, but it's worth getting money out of. Buy it up and then dump it, sell it. When it goes up to $40, $39, $35, sell it. Get your money and then disappear without his stock. And I'm not, like I said, I like this guy. He gives out information, but he's not giving it out because he knows about this stuff, but he's not telling you flat out. You got to be in, and who's the majority of the people that's in? The majority of people that's in on this stuff are white people. There's not a lot of blacks that's into stock market. You can count on a hand how many people you know in the black community or minority community that's in on stocks, that's making $1 million or $100,000 a year in stocks. He knows about this stuff. This is what I mean when I say institutional racism. I'm not saying he's a racist. I'm gonna repeat that. I like his show. He talks about some good stuff if you know about it. But he's not letting everybody know. Like, I plan on teaching my daughter and my granddaughters about this stuff, because I plan on spreading the message. But this is what I mean when I say, listen to some more of it.
Business model. Bed Bath & Beyond either. And AMC Movies. These were during COVID, these were the entities that Reddit investors rallied around. Same thing's going on here. Truth Social. So when people say, wow, stock price is high, I should get into it. I mean, I'm not giving stock advice here. Let's be clear. However, I'm just giving you the fundamentals. Terrible set of loss numbers for Trump media. But you know that it's being bid up as a cult stock because of the comments that are being made in Truth Social that this is a way to support their cult leader. I mean, the comments alone, I'm just going to read a couple of them to you. The comments alone tell you everything you need to know. When somebody wanted to bid the price up to 45.47, just a random number, the user on Truth Social named Pratty Daddy said, great way to say Patriots in control or trust the plan if we can get it to 45 something. And he would be the 47th president. So let's get it to 45, 47. This has nothing to do with the fundamental economics of the business model. This has to do with crazy Trump supporters who want to bid up the stock to put money in his pocket.
Now listen to what he's saying. The stock is not worth nothing but maybe $15 to $20. Whoever this guy is, it might not even be somebody. It might be him saying this. Get the stock up to $45. You know why? Because that investor is going to buy the stock at 20, and when these cult followers who love Donald Trump keep buying it, and the stock goes up to 40, 45 bucks, this man might invest $2,000 into Donald Trump stocks. 20 divided by $2,000. This man can be a thousandaire in 5 minutes. Think about this. Think about that. He invests $2,000 in Donald Trump stocks, $20 a share, and it goes up to $40 a share. He just made damn near $2,000 in one stock option. Just that fast. 5 minutes. That's all it took. 5 minutes. And this is what I mean. He's letting people know this is what's happening. But he's not letting people know. Continue on.
Okay. Similarly, another Truth Social user admitted on the platform, quote, I bought several times last Monday and Tuesday, little by little, to show support of the stock. Another one wrote, this is a truth moment. And no matter what happens tomorrow, this merger will happen tomorrow or in the future. We will win this war no matter what. This is all reporting in the Wall Street Journal. And I've looked at the SPAC issue before, the Special Purpose Acquisition Company issue, which is what this is. This is a way generally for a company to quickly go public without having to go through all of the regulatory hurdles.
I'm going to end this right here. This is the reason why we have so many homeless people in the country. Most of those homeless people, they don't know anything about this. They just know they don't have money to pay their rent. So they got to live in tent cities. That's what they know. And shame. But that's today's show. I hope you guys watch. I hope you guys learned something from today. And this is the Daily Read, and I'm out.
The business, motherfucker.
The Daily Read.
Business.